Richard Campbell here from DotNetRocks. I'm at Build in Anaheim, California, and I'm sitting with Mr. Billy Hollis. Nice to see you again, my friend.
Always a pleasure, Richard.
So what have you thought of Build so far?
Well, it's, gosh, you know, they asked Mao Zedong about 150 years after the French Revolution what he thought of it. He said, it's too early to tell.
And you did something very unusual that, with working with Telerik, you put together a pre-con on the Monday about user experience.
That's right. Well, I thought about the fact that they canceled the pre-cons. If you did a little psychological analysis, the reason was pretty obvious. You didn't want people talking about older technology stacks and then possibly having someone come along 2 days later and say, you don't need to worry about that anymore. You just wasted your time. So what then would people want to hear about that was guaranteed to be relevant? So I decided, well, it's pretty clear to me that people in the Microsoft space don't know enough about user experience and the basic design principles. So I have a class on that, took the content, condensed it down to about 5 hours, and in 2 weeks got 130 people to come and hear about that. And I figure that material, I mean, design principles go back to the Greeks and the Romans. It's not like they're going to go obsolete this week, no matter what Microsoft says.
Yeah, design principles are not specific to software.
That's right. Or to any, even the ones that are around software aren't specific to any particular technology or stack. So we've just recently in the whole world, Apple's kind of led the way, but Microsoft is getting there, had the technology with enough degrees of freedom in what we can do for the user to really put these principles to work. When you're working with the software equivalent of Lego blocks, it's kind of hard to create the experience for the user you might want. But now that we've got, you know, the ability to sculpt and go to a much finer grained level of work, we can do something that the users like a lot better. So we had a great time. It was the measure is, to me, is always, do people get up and leave early? And almost no one did, and that told me that the people liked it.
Yeah, it seemed like everyone was very engaged. Lots of applause. You know, they were excited about different elements. That I'm really interested to see if we're coming into an era where we're going to get more structure around our UIs, more definition of the way things should look.
Well, I would like to see that as well. And then the problem is that we have enough variability in the problems that people need to solve with technology that there isn't any one-size-fits-all solution, which means there's a certain amount of innovation required in the process. So Metro is fine, but is Metro going to be the right user interface for everything? Well, I'm pretty skeptical about that. So we're still going to need innovation, but probably for the 90% case of people building UI, they're not going to have either the inclination or the money to invest or the native talent or whatever combination it takes to do true UI innovation. They need ideas to seize on and go, that applies to me, and I can pretty much duplicate that for my circumstances. We need those examples, and I hope that we'll start to see more of those over the next couple of years.
And isn't that ultimately in the best interest of the user as well? That the user wants an interface they can recognize, that you reduce the amount of friction necessary to get your work done?
Well, for users, it's a matter of intuition almost, that if it feels right to them, then it's good. But one element of that is consistency, that they've seen something like this before. And another element of it is it fits what they're trying to do. And another element of it is that it's not threatening, that it feels smooth and natural. So all of these things come together to make that right experience. And users vary a lot, and problems vary a lot. So I don't know that there's, as I said, there's a tendency in especially the Microsoft space to go, here's a solution. Well, it seems to apply to this set. Let's just apply it everywhere.
I figured out this hammer, so everything's a nail.
Everything, but yeah. And when I got my better, to me, the better metaphor from tools is I have a power drill, and I really, really like the power drill. I use it a lot, but I don't turn it around and use the handle to hammer nails.
Right.
Because I have a hammer for that. So.
One other thought, I'd like your impressions on just the role of components now, component suites in building software. Is it, looking at some of the things that Microsoft's moving towards, is that relationship going to change?
That's a very good question. It's clear that there's a pretty big market gap still. It's clear that Microsoft isn't going to change course anytime soon away from complex APIs. When Steven Sinofsky stands up and says we've got 1,800 objects in this new Windows API, WinRT, well, at one level I salute that, because it's time and past time for that Windows API, originally designed in 1985, to change because of changing conditions. Heck, you know, we're looking at, I live in a neighborhood where the houses are 50, 60 years old, and when people buy them, they either tear them down and start over, or they gut them and rebuild them for a modern lifestyle. Well, software evolves a whole lot faster than houses, doesn't it? So it's time to make that change, but Microsoft seems to be focused on, here, let's provide the raw capability to facilitate this change. And they've left a pretty big surface area that component vendors and other types of vendors need to come in and put the layer on top of that that makes it a lot more understandable and abstracts it down for particular problem sets. So I think that there is at least as much room in the ecosystem for components vendors as there ever were. Especially when you look at, if we talked about some of the capabilities to put standard things in place for users, for developers to use to give that good user experience. I don't mean to be catty about it, but I don't think Microsoft is going to give us that. Based on my experience in the XAML world over the last 5 years in WPF and Silverlight, if that's going to come from somewhere, it's going to come from the third-party vendors. And I know people in that space that have a lot of sensitivity to those things.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some really interesting things as all of these technologies evolve. We're going to need more.
Yeah. Well, more. Yeah. In some ways we need more, other ways we need less. It's that sorting process that we need to learn to go through. Certainly the psychology of the people in the Microsoft ecosystem has, I tend to think of it in evolutionary terms. The .NET ecosystem is a complex ecosystem. What did it take to survive there? Understanding code and complex APIs, and survival of the fittest there lets you use your left brain to do things. Well, if we're going to move into this new space where we refocus back on the user, and that's a big part of Build, is taking Microsoft back from we've got to compete with Java and beat them in the enterprise, refocusing back to the user. Well, if we're going to do that, we need more people in this space, in this ecosystem, that have different, more diverse skills. Because those left brain skills are not going to teach us how to make a user interface less stressful for a user.
Yeah, it's a very different set of skills, and it seems like the tools are getting better at making those skills usable. We can actually get some results from them.
That's right. It's once upon a time, 5 years ago, even, we really couldn't put beautiful gradients and layered things and get away from rectangular sort of arrangements. I used to do some work in environmental engineering, did some software for that, and I remember a discussion between an architect and an environmental engineer, and at the end the architect said, if engineers built buildings, every one of them would be a giant rectangular slab, because that's what's efficient to build and cheap to build. But nobody wants to live in a giant rectangular slab. So architects build buildings that cost more and more difficult to use, or to build, and in some respects more costly to maintain. But that's what people want, and that's people are what we're trying to satisfy. We aren't housing ants, we're housing people. So we need both sensibilities. We need the engineering sensibility that has traditionally been the strength of Microsoft, and that other sensibility. If all applications were designed by programmers, they would all be screens with nothing but rectangles on them, and rectangles, well, you know what? That's exactly what we got right now.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
We have the equivalent in the software world of giant block buildings. And I think people would really like to see us go beyond that.
Billy, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks, Richard. It's always fun.